Well, hello, and welcome to another edition of the Hobbitcast. I'm your host, Ben McDonald, and today's episode 12, our thyroid show. I have a very special guest today. I have on the blower with us today, nurse practitioner Teresa Mealy. Teresa is a board-certified family nurse practitioner. She's been in practice for 13 years, and she's in the process of doing board certification through the Institute of Functional Medicine. Teresa, can you hear me?
I can. Hi, Ben.
Hello. Well, welcome to the show. Thanks for coming on and spending some time with us.
It's my pleasure. Thank you for having me.
Well, today's show is all about the thyroid. As you know, we actually met on the Facebook group for the ketogenic diet. And what we're interested in talking about today is a pretty common phenomenon, something called the thyroid gland, and a condition that many people would call the hypothyroidism. So
yes,
I thought today we could just hit a few beats, specifically what is the thyroid gland? We're going to kind of talk about that, and you can explain to me why this is such a common problem and what issues we see and why it's so pervasive in the weight loss community versus the general population. We'll talk about how to evaluate whether or not your thyroid is okay or not. And then we'll throw out a couple of tips on things that you can do to manage yourself, but then more importantly, how to get the right support from your doctor to move forward from any conditions that you may uncover through the right kind of testing.
Sounds good.
All right. Well, let's just start with the basics. Well, what exactly is the thyroid gland? Where is that in my body? Somewhere north of the liver? I don't know.
So the thyroid gland is relatively small, and it sits right near your Adam's apple in the front of your neck.
Okay.
And it is really responsible for metabolism. It's responsible for quite a few things: metabolism, fertility, libido, blood pressure issues. If you have high blood pressure, this could be underactive thyroid, could be a cause. It can have implications with cholesterol, heart health, so congestive heart failure, these kinds of things, hair and nail health. So a lot of times women will come in because they have thinning hair, they're losing a lot of hair. This is thyroid related. Okay. Concentration, brain fog, even carpal tunnel, iron deficiency, anemia. The list, it really goes on and on. Wow. Constipation. So yeah, in thyroid deficiency, it definitely has an adverse effect on mood and causes a poor sense of well-being.
So it really sounds like this thyroid hormone is very pervasive in the body. It affects so many different systems, and not just directs things, but more of, this causes this, and it's a sort of a domino effect with all these other things, right?
Right. And it also gets confusing because when, I use women a lot because women are usually the ones that seek help from a provider. And when I say provider during this Hobbitcast, I'm talking about MDs, DOs, nurse practitioners, PAs. So many times it's women that go to try and seek answers to these symptoms. And these symptoms that I just read to you, they kind of seem like age-related symptoms. So people get kind of brushed off like, well, you're 42 or you're 46. And, people are tired at 46. People are a little depressed at 46. It's hard to concentrate at 46. Nobody's libido is really high at 46. So, just take some Paxil. I bet you're just probably a little depressed. And so they just get brushed off. And these really are implicated. A lot of these symptoms are implicated in thyroid.
Wow. Now, just to continue down that road, why is it that so many of our population in the weight loss board on Facebook seem to have thyroid-related issues?
Well, I think that most of the population in the world has thyroid issues. And that is because we have a lot of environmental toxins that get into our system called endocrine disruptors. And they block thyroid production. They block receptors. So thyroid can't attach to your receptors to make a difference. We have fluoride in most of America in the water supply that attacks your thyroid. We eat in America a lot of grains. And grains is the #1 thyroid disruptor. a little bit of stress. So I think a lot of us have issues that are undetected and underdiagnosed.
And then as a downstream consequence of some of those environmental stressors and nutritional stressors, we would see that thyroid hit you. And then through a deregulation of that thyroid, you're saying that that actually causes like weight loss and or weight gain and metabolism issues, right?
Right, because no matter how regimented you are on diet and no matter how regimented you are on exercise, if your thyroid is off, you will not lose weight. And no matter, like I see a lot of this too with fertility. So I just want to tell people too, if there's anyone listening that has trouble with fertility, do not underestimate thyroid. I have helped several women get pregnant just by adjusting thyroid. And it's even a small dose too. It's, like I said, it's implicated in a lot of things and things that you wouldn't even think of, like fertility.
Yeah, just to throw in a plug from my point of view, we know that the ketogenic diet is very favorable to the hormonal environment. So what it really sounds like is the thyroid is a very important hormone in this big milieu of various endocrine hormones, whether you're talking about the sex hormones, all of the gonadotropins for the pregnancy stuff, but then also just, straight up and down metabolism stuff. It just seems like it's just such an integral part of so much of what we talk about when people are trying to pursue optimal health.
Absolutely. And, when you have thyroid dysfunction, you can't, like you're saying, not go downstream and not have testosterone deficiencies and progesterone deficiencies and adrenal deficiencies. So it is all, the neuroendocrine system is all interrelated. So definitely. And thyroid and testosterone are the feel-good hormones for men and women. So when these things are off, people just do not feel good. Their memory, their cognition, which is, just how they think and process things, and they show some mental slowness. You're just like thinking, I'm just forgetful, I'm 46. And so that's really not the case. It is when patients, and I only say this because I hear it every single day from patients, that is a bogus answer to me, and it's a lazy answer.
Yeah. I like that. I think one of the things that made me really want to shoot a full show on thyroid is we have folks who we work with to get their macros dialed in. We get their nutritional intake perfect. They're all squared away on the basic input that we can control. They still have trouble losing weight. They are doing all the right things, following all of our recommendations, and they're slow to lose, even though they're on track. So one of the things I'm always suspect of is what's going on with the thyroid, because as you described, it's so integral to every component related to weight loss. Right.
It has, it's like 200 or 300 cellular functions that the thyroid does in our body. It's a miraculous little gland. For being so little, it's responsible for a huge amount of responses.
All right. I'm going to throw up a kind of a nerdly diagram, but I don't want to get into the super science of this, but I thought it would be good to have a visual aid as we kind of talk about this. One of the things I think we need to think about is, how do you measure this very complex system? Because it sounds like it's multifaceted. There's a lot of confusion about what the right thing to do is, what the right labs are. I know I've seen some doctors order some crazy labs. What do you think we should be doing around testing for these complex systems?
Well, so this diagram that you have up is actually nice because it has the TSH right there. So TSH is the only thing that a lot of physicians or nurse practitioners, providers in general, measure. So the TSH is not an actual thyroid hormone. It is a messenger. It is a messenger signal that gets sent from your brain to your thyroid that it is low in thyroid hormones. There's 4 different hormones: T1, T2, T3, and T4. But T3 and T4 are the major ones. So your brain sends TSH, which is thyroid stimulating hormone. That signals your thyroid to produce more thyroid hormones. So the problem is providers test TSH. If TSH is normal, then they pat the women on the head and they say, your TSH is normal.
Sure.
Can you see how passionate I am about this? Because I hear it, women being put down daily, but it's all in your head. It's just a little PMS and probably some depression, but your TSH is normal. Therefore, your thyroid health is completely normal. But what they don't look at is the T4 level or the T3 level or the reverse T3 level or antibody levels. So I see so many times, I don't have enough fingers and toes to count how many times a TSH is relatively normal, because this is a wide range too, right? So TSH, the range on the lab level is just an arbitrary level that has been brought up by a group of people that sit on a board and say, this is what we're going to call normal. And then, but you know, when that is like between, and it depends on age too, but TSH, again, is just a measure. What we really want to know is what T4 is and what T3 is, because there's plenty of times TSH is relatively normal. T3 is not so bad. T4 is pretty okay, but people have 900 antibodies. So they have Hashimoto's. They have an autoimmune attack on their body, but nobody's run that because the TSH is normal.
Okay, so that let's back up a second then, and let's talk about what are the common types of thyroid malfunctions that we would see.
Okay.
So
go ahead.
The main one that we're going to be focusing on today is various forms of hypothyroidism, right? Where we're not making enough of the hormone, and that's causing this downregulation that you started explaining to us. But within that, there's actually a lot of different causes, right?
Right. I mean, you can have primary hypothyroidism. And in reality, providers don't sit with you and say, hey, you have a secondary or a tertiary hypothyroidism. We just say your thyroid's not functioning optimally. But primary hypothyroidism is basically the production of the thyroid hormone is decreased. And then secondarily, you can have a conversion issue. So
okay, so let me jump in here. And when you say production decreased, we're talking about there's an organ, it sits in your throat, it physically is not making enough of the chemical.
That's correct.
And the causes for that can be a few different things, but generally it's either input of TSH or it's a physiological, a biological problem like tumors, nodules, that kind of thing, right?
Right.
Okay.
That's right.
Keep going.
And then the secondary type of hypothyroidism is a conversion issue. So, and you know, thyroid is a little difficult. So if you're listening and you're like, what are they talking about? It is a lot of pathophysiology, but T4 to T3 conversion is what you need. And so the thyroid gland itself makes 80% T4 and 20% T3. However, T3 is the most metabolically active hormone. So T3 is what we're really concerned with. So if you're not making enough T4 to convert to T3, that's a problem. Or if you need enzymes to convert T4 to T3. If your enzymes aren't working correctly, you aren't converting to T3, which is where we want to go. If you have PCOS or polycystic ovarian syndrome, a lot of times you guys do not convert well from T4 to T3. So we really need the conversion of T4 to T3 for health, because like I said, T3 is the active metabolic hormone.
Yes. Okay, so I want to make sure I understand that. So we've got the pituitary gland sends down this thyroid stimulating hormone, TSH, goes, hey, make some hormone. So then that gland, the thyroid, is going to produce primarily T4, but then also a little bit of T3. But it's the T3 that's the most exciting component of that.
Right.
Because
it's T3.
It's the thing that actually does the work, right?
Right.
It's the thing that gets into the cell and causes all the favorable adaptations we'd be excited about having from thyroid hormone. So what happens to this T4? It just hangs around?
Yeah, if it doesn't convert, it just hangs around, and then you build up symptoms and symptoms, because what we're really looking for is T3. But as providers in school, you're only taught to treat the TSH, which again is not even a thyroid hormone, it's a messenger. So so let's just throw an obnoxious number. Say you get somebody, which I've had before, with a TSH of 112. Now the lab level goes up, depending on the lab, to about 5.0. So say you get somebody that has a TSH of 112. All you're taught to do is give a T4 only medicine, which we'll get to, which is Synthroid or levothyroxine. Get the TSH down to a normal level, and boom, you're done.
Okay.
But that doesn't necessarily resolve symptoms, because you need T3 production to resolve symptoms.
And the T3 production can come in those two forms. Either you get a little bit directly from the thyroid, but the majority of it comes from this inactive T4 form being converted into T3 through a bunch of magical biologic process, right?
That's right. And actually, T4 conversion to T3 is not really well studied or researched. It's a theory that we've held on to for many, many, many years, probably since the 40s or 30s. It's a theory that we've held on to, but I just don't like to sit with my fingers crossed and hope and pray that your T4 converts to T3.
Right. Now, I actually have another way of looking at this in a different slide here, which is the T4 coming out of the thyroid gland will go into either T3 or reverse T3. Now, that was something we haven't talked about yet. So what is the reverse T3?
Well, reverse T3 is something we don't want, and it mimics T3, but it doesn't have the metabolic activity that resolves symptoms. So like I said, it's structurally similar to T3, but it binds to the receptor sites and then blocks the real T3 from getting in there and resolving symptoms. You can get a conversion to reverse T3. For me, I think a lot of times it's adrenal dysfunction, infection, or you have it up there, toxins, stress, trauma, the low-calorie diet, and inflammation, which a lot of us in the whole entire world live on in inflammation in our bodies.
Sure. I think one of the most interesting parts of this conversation is trying to understand when we're talking about these hypothyroid conditions. We've talked about primary, which is, some kind of biological problem, either upstream from the thyroid where we're not getting enough TSH for some reason, or downstream from the thyroid where the gland is working properly, but for whatever reason, the hormone isn't arriving into the nucleus of the cell as expected. I think there's a third category of this before we get into the specifics of what we can do to influence some of these things. Can you talk a little bit more about the autoimmune pieces, such as Graves', Hashimoto's, things like that?
Right. So the most common one is Hashimoto's, and that is autoimmune hypothyroidism. And that means you would have antibodies on lab work. And many times that is initiated and perpetuated by grains. So those of us in the ketogenic world realize that grains are dysfunctional for us for other reasons, but grains are the #1 disruptor of thyroid health. So when you start intaking a lot of grains, or for other reasons your gut becomes leaky, then toxins in food that are supposed to be sterile in your intestines leak out into your system, and you develop antibody antigen complexes against your body, and then it attacks your thyroid, and that's Hashimoto's. So that is severely depressed thyroid function. And then Graves' disorder is the opposite. It's hyperthyroidism, and that is too much thyroid circulating. So those are people, in theory, on paper, that are kind of high strung, skinny, because their metabolism is really revved up. And those people need to be careful for bone issues, having too much thyroid hormone, bone fractures and stuff.
Wow. Okay.
But what I was talking about before, that the TSH is normal for a lot of people. And then they come to me and I'm like, well, I'm not satisfied with just the TSH. So I run the whole panel and they have antibodies that are 900 for Hashimoto's. Well, some doctors are like, or providers are like, well, it just doesn't matter. Well, I think it matters. And I think even if you have antibody level of 20, that matters, because it's like being pregnant. You either are or you aren't. So you either have antibodies that are attacking your system, like thyroid, but also your knee cartilage looks like thyroid. So now you have joint pain. Wonder why I have joint pain. It must be arthritis. Well, no, you have an autoimmune condition. It's attacking things that look like the thyroid. I mean, to me, this is a big deal, because then if you know you already have some sort of barrier that's been taken over, then you're going to set yourself up for other autoimmune conditions and other dysfunction.
And that's a good point I want to make sure you hit really hard, which is we normally would see if you have one autoimmune disease, you often have more coming if you don't already have more than one, right?
Absolutely.
That's something that we've seen a lot in the boards, where it's very rare that someone will say, oh, I have this autoimmune disease. They'll say, I have these autoimmune diseases. It's something that once you trip this, your body being overinflamed and starting to attack itself with unusual antibodies that aren't normal, it does seem to be very pervasive and progressive too. Like I think I saw a statistic where if you have rheumatoid arthritis, within 10 years, you have an 80% chance of being diagnosed with a secondary autoimmune condition. Just stuff like that, where you start to see these ongoing progressions of what is essentially an inflammatory state continue to heat things up and make your body make bad decisions about what's going on.
That's correct. And in functional medicine, and like for me personally in my practice, I don't care what people come to me for. The crux of health is not to have your body on fire from the inside out.
Mm-hmm. That's great. Okay, so let's dive right in, because I know a lot of people have received a diagnosis from their doctor. They hear you talking about, libido, metabolism, hair and nail health, things like that. They go, man, I'm just going down the checklist. I think I have all these things. My doctor tests my TSH and declares me fine. Mm-hmm. So we know that's not sufficient, because you've already started to talk about there are these other things that you have to measure upstream and downstream, right?
Right.
When it comes time to really make an evaluation of a basic state of thyroid health, what are the minimum tests that we need to have?
So the test that most providers run is just the TSH. And if you're lucky, they'll run a free T4. My complete diagnostic testing for thyroid would be a TSH, a free T3, a free T4, reverse T3, thyroid antibodies, and there's two types. You can have the peroxidase antibodies and the thyroglobulin antibodies. I also run a selenium red blood cell, and then I do an iodine test. And then many times in our practice, we test cortisol levels through saliva testing.
Sure. And so the cortisol testing, you're actually testing for a different condition that can have a similar influence on the body, right?
Right. Absolutely. Yeah.
And that's what do they call that? Adrenal fatigue? Is that cortisol?
Adrenal? Yeah, adrenal dysfunction. You can have exhaustion, fatigue. I don't know what the those are terms we throw around. I don't know what the exact real one is. But when we eat terrible food and we are in stressful relationships, and you're hauling your kids to 5 different activities each night of the week, your adrenals get run down, because they are only meant to fight or flight. Like you are getting attacked by a saber tooth when you're going out to kill your food for the night. So they're not used to being constantly going. And so if you have bad adrenal health, it can leak over into thyroid health. If you have bad thyroid health, it can leak over to testosterone health. So it is all connected, but I don't want to muddy the waters for this talk, but yes, it definitely is interrelated.
Well, I wanted to give you a chance to muddy those waters, because it is a connected series. One of the things that I'm famous for talking about is when you start getting a lot of obesity, this adipose tissue, it actually becomes an endocrine organ and starts throwing out hormones all on its own.
Mhm.
And people are like, what do you mean that my obesity can impact my entire body? It's because all these little hormones are just floating around, influencing individual cells all over your body. It's not just the thyroid. It's not just the sex hormones. It's not just this or that. It's when you start, I keep using the word milieu, but it's a soup. When you take all this stuff and put it together, it's the operating system that these cells have in your body to execute against. And there's so many different subtle influences that can have profound effects in your perception of your health.
Right. And, that's why for me, and I was trained through advanced bioidentical hormone replacement therapy through WorldLink Medical. And so we, as a collective group in that forum, we think optimizing all hormones are what we need. And so part of this is thyroid, but like you're saying, it's the other stuff too. It's DHEA, testosterone, progesterone for women,
Sure.
all of them. So they are all interrelated and connected.
And just we didn't pre talk about this, but when you talk about progesterone, especially for menopausal women, and testosterone as well, both of those hormones, a lot of our population are older women. So I know this is something that's on people's minds. They're postmenopausal. They're not under any form of hormone replacement therapy. They don't have the progesterone. They don't have the testosterone replacements, and their levels are very low. And those kind of manifest in the same sort of problems as what we're talking about here with this hypothyroid. And they need to be tested, right?
Right, because sometimes I'll see women like at the grocery store or something. You know how you just strike up a conversation, and they're like, "Well, I'm in menopause," and actually people that are perimenopause, so my age group, which is 45, 46, need progesterone and testosterone and DHEA and all these things, even in perimenopause. But definitely older women will say, "Well, I've already been through that. I'm not having hot flashes. I'm not having night sweats. Sex isn't painful. It's fine." But what I say then is, right, but if you don't have adequate thyroid, your cholesterol starts to creep up, your blood pressure creeps up. If you don't have adequate estrogen, your bone health is bad, so you're set up for fractures and osteoporosis. If you don't have progesterone is the hormone of contentment. You have a little bit of anxiety, depression, you're not sleeping that well. If you don't have testosterone, you don't have sex drive. Testosterone also helps with blood pressure, cholesterol. So all of these things are health prevention, not just like, hey, give me some testosterone so I have some bigger muscles and I want to have sex. Like it's way more than that. It's prevention. And also those things help with insulin resistance. Then again, helps with thyroid. So, it's all interrelated.
It's very connected. And one of the things I really want to bang the gong on, because you're giving us some insight into how functional medicine doctors approach this. If you are an older woman and you are on progesterone only hormone replacement therapy, there may be a component that you're missing by not also supplementing a little testosterone. We're not talking about grams of it, or just a little bit, just to take the edge off of that. Makes a huge difference in both perceived energy level, but also your ability to recover and be active and have those feelings of strength and vitality. That comes from the testosterone, not from the progesterone.
Absolutely. Testosterone gives you the zest for life, your vitality. And I just think everybody over 40 needs to be tested, men and women, but definitely about 45 to 50, everyone needs a good hormone protocol.
I dig that. Okay.
Yeah.
Let's get back on the slides.
I get excited.
It's an exciting thing because so many people are in this state and are not being managed by someone who has optimal health in mind, but rather has preventative medicine at most in mind. But more than likely, they just have a GP that's trying to keep them off the slab,
Yeah. And listen, general practitioners, my gosh, their job is incredibly hard. I only worked family practice for a short time. Otherwise, I did specialties. But you have to see, like one practice I worked at, it was a walk-in clinic plus appointments. So some days you saw 40 people. Oof. How good and effectively can you really treat 40 people a day? So it's a pill for an ill system in the Western medicine, and they have to get you in because they have a short time, diagnose you, that ends it, here's your prescription. In functional medicine, the diagnosis is the beginning for us. You have diabetes, you have thyroid dysfunction, okay, let's go upstream and figure out where that went wrong and how we fix it. So it's a big difference.
Yeah, I love that. We're actually going to talk specifically later in the show about how does someone go about obtaining that different level of medical care if it's within their means. So we'll come back to that.
Okay.
Let's talk about the factors that affect this thyroid function and start to speak about things that you could do, lifestyle and nutrition, that may have a positive influence.
You know, when I'm doing a consult or follow-ups with patients, I give them a lot of information because my consult is about an hour and a half. And so it's a lot of information. And what I'm attempting to do in that consult is not overwhelm, although that's what happens because you're giving so much info. I want to give you like 15 or 20 things that are an issue because I want you to be able to pick out one or two to change. And your one or two things that you can change might not be what the next person can change.
Okay.
So like I said, endocrine disruptors are big for thyroid. So for some people, just changing plastics to glass is a big deal because you're not getting the PBA and the BPA into your system that leaks in by using microwaves and styrofoam and those kinds of things.
Right.
Getting off of the grains because that helps with thyroid function.
Sure.
Getting away from stress, which is one of the more difficult things because not everyone has the luxury to quit your job that you hate or, leave your husband or your wife that drives you insane. But
Sure.
these things we have to work on because these things directly impact our health. So if I have you on a perfect hormone protocol, you eat precisely the way I'm asking you to and you exercise. But if you live with a narcissistic husband or wife, there's going to be a lot of stress. Your adrenals are going to be taxed, sure. All that stuff. So all these things matter. But eat organic where you can eat because pesticides and fertilizers, these things are endocrine disruptors and they cause dysfunction with conversion from T4 to T3. They decrease your magnesium, so that affects your mitochondrial health. It decreases your vitamin D conversion in your liver, so a lot of different things there. Inflammation, which is mainly diet. Food can be a poison or it can be medicine. So food is your communication. It's your information that the basic cells, your DNA, take, and they can take cancer cells and turn on cancer cells or turn off cancer cells because food is so magnificent and magic.
Sure.
Certain medications affect your thyroid. There's beta blockers, things like that can affect thyroid, can affect weight loss. I'm trying to look around on this slide. Selenium, iodine, these things all help with thyroid conversion. Zinc also helps with testosterone production.
So let me throw a couple of questions at you. You talked about fluoride specifically. If you told me to avoid fluoride, I wouldn't even know how to start. It's in my water, it's in my toothpaste. What would I do to get away from it?
Okay, so buy organic toothpaste that does not have fluoride. You can get that at any of your local health food stores. We use Nature's Gate toothpaste. Fluoride is tricky because even though we have well water right now, which is beautiful spring water that we've had tested, that's perfect. But
Nice.
You're right, it's in every county and every community in America.
Oh, sure.
I have some issues with fluoride, that's beyond the scope of this talk, but Berkey filter. So we have a Berkey filter, a travel Berkey filter that you can get and you can travel with it and it filters the water. You could do reverse osmosis filtration in your house, which is a lot of money. And again,
the Berkey filter is like the bucket system, right?
Yes.
The full-size one's like the double buckets that you put on there?
That's right.
Okay.
Because a lot of your fluoride, your filtration systems don't filter fluoride. So you have to be really careful to get one that, and Berkey specifically, I think you also need a fluoride filter, a separate one too. So just make sure whatever filtration device you get is fluoride too.
What do you think about the shower filters to pull out fluoride? Those are expensive and you make the showers really weak. So I'm curious.
Yeah, I was just it's a lot. And see, we don't even have shower filters, but you need one because it filters out chlorine too and fluoride. And when you get the steam in the shower, you inhale that and then you're talking lung health too. So yeah, it's pervasive. Okay.
All right. You also talked about getting away from the PCBs. Again, I'm just coming out of left field here. there are a lot of folks that are advocating the EDTA, oral cleation stuff. Is that something you ever deal with in your practice, or is that for more esoteric stuff?
Yeah, I don't deal with it. I believe in it though. I just think it really is a niche that you need to be careful with. So
Uh-huh.
I don't have any experience in that.
Okay, I've seen people talk about that, and it always gives me the heebie-jeebies. Not because I don't think it doesn't work, but because it is a very not well understood medical protocol that
Yeah.
involves a very small number of world experts talking about it, and then a lot of people just following along without necessarily knowing exactly how that works.
Right.
But
I
it's
don't think
something to think about, if, especially if you're like a welder or exposed to lead somehow. You grew up in a lead household. I mean, that's real stuff. Like, that's not a joke, right?
absolutely. And when you look at these old mechanics that and now they use like latex gloves and stuff, but those old mechanics, and they
Mm-hmm.
don't, and their fingers are just imprinted with dirt and grease. I mean, you got to think about that stuff. But that is nothing that you can willy-nilly around with. Just like hormones, you have to be careful where you go for hormones, because there's people, that's my medical term, they're willy-nillying around with it and they haven't been formally trained. Even OBGYNs who are supposed to know hormones do not. So be careful.
All right. From a nutritional standpoint, are there foods that we obviously this is the ketogenic diet fireside chat, so we're all about eating the meat and green vegetables kind of a diet where that has very low grains. I think this talk has really made me very convicted. I have a personal belief that the ketogenic diet is best executed in what I would call clean keto, where you have these meat and vegetables as your primary foods. You kind of stay away from, the low carb tortillas and the, all the weird keto cookery fake stuff, like the carb quick bakery stuff. Just really stick to whole real foods that kind of look like what they grew as. That's the form that I advocate. And what I'm hearing is that you're kind of saying the same thing, that if you stay away from grains explicitly, because I think that's the one that really trips up people. It's so easy to do one of these if it fits your macros model, where the low carb tortilla that's mostly wheat grains, or but the new one, what's the wheat? It's not. It's a flour, that oat fiber. That's the new one that's starting to catch in. Everybody's doing oat fiber stuff. It's still it's got all those polyphenol anti-nutrient stuff in there. It causes leaky gut, right?
Right, totally. And you got to be careful when you're eating meat, because you need grass-fed meat, because when they're fed grains, it is in the meat, and then when you eat the meat, you get the grains. So you think you're having steak and broccoli and you're being totally ketogenic, but you're not, because you're getting grains sneaked into your diet.
Okay. Certainly something to be very suspect of if you are fighting autoimmunity challenges, not just regular weight loss or trying to maintain optimal health. You're celiac, or if you have Hashis, that can be a really important cofactor, right?
Right. And even though people aren't celiac, there is a ton of research out there that most of us are non-celiac gluten sensitivity. It's a
I just
yeah.
I just read a study that was saying 25% of us are sensitive in our guts to these various phytonutrient stuff. I don't want to say gluten, because it's more than that,
It's
but
more.
it's that kind of thing of it's a greater percentage than we ever thought that it would be. It's just subclinical, so you can't point at it like the celiac and go, oh well, your villi are all flattened, so you're definitely having it.
That's
It
right.
could be subclinical and still be pretty nasty.
Absolutely. And I advocate grain-free completely. So that includes corn, oat, rye, barley, and then the wheat, because all of it causes inflammation. And inflammation, to me, is the root cause of all issues, including cancer and thyroid dysfunction. Food can deplete hormones quicker than age. So we really have to be mindful of inflammation. And so whenever you eat any of the type of grains, it's highly inflammatory. We weren't designed to digest those. The wheat of today, anyway, or the grains of today.
Thank you. Okay. Let's get to the slide that I think a lot of people are interested in, which is let's talk about what I need to take on an index card when I go see my doctor if I suspect I have this issue. And then we'll talk a little bit about, are there any vitamins that you can take? But then I also really want to hear you talk about the process of finding a supportive doc, because I hang out on some of these thyroid issue boards, and boy, oh boy, finding a supportive doc seems to be the most difficult component of dealing with this condition. It's not treating the condition, it's finding somebody who will treat the condition properly and actually know what they're doing. So we're going to go down that rat hole, and I'm just going to let you off the chain because I know somebody like you probably has a point of view on that. So we will let's talk about the labs. You already hit these once, but let's go through this real quick. And can you talk a little bit about this range thing? Because the range of normal versus optimal, I think, is a key point that not everybody gets.
Right. So, for a TSH in my age group, 45, I'm 45, TSH is 0.40 to 4.5. So if you go in, and I see this all the time again, if you go in and you have, because most people will come to me at least with the TSH. So they come to me and they say, oh, well, it's not my thyroid, so you're going to have to figure out what else it is. So I'm saying, well, give me your thyroid results and let's check it out. And all they give me is a TSH. So if you're 18 and you're getting it with a certain lab, your TSH is suddenly allowed, and you can't see my little quote fingers, my obnoxious quote fingers, because you're allowed to suddenly be 5.7. So if your TSH at 45 is 4.6 and the range stopped at 4.5, your provider is going to say you're still normal. They will not treat that. Just like equally aggravating, a man comes in with a testosterone level of 301, the level starts at 300, and the doctor or provider will say you can't get testosterone, it's not low. That's just bogus. That's a lazy answer because you're still having symptoms at that low. So these ranges are arbitrary ranges. So if you go to like Walmart and you take a group of people and you base your lab results on them, and you go to Whole Foods or Trader Joe's, that's going to be a different population, right? Absolutely. And you take their labs and you make the mean average of labs out of those people, you're going to have different ranges. So these ranges are arbitrary, and don't get hung up on them. We want optimal. So if the easiest way to understand optimal versus normal is with testosterone. You look at a 70-year-old man and he has a testosterone level, let's just be nice to him, of 350. Okay. 350 is totally normal and probably above average for a 70-year-old male. But if you look closer, he's not playing golf every day. His erections are not strong. He probably is not having sex every day. He's hunched over. He's probably got some coronary disease. His cholesterol is probably a little bit high. He's not optimal. So we don't want to just be normal for our age. We want to be optimal. And these optimal ranges are in the literature. So it suggests if you have a range of T3 or a TSH of this, you are going to have prevention of these things. So this is why we go by serum levels. This is how we know what level we want to be at. So on a TSH range of 0.4 to 4.5, we want to be in the lower end. Most people feel great at 0.5 to 1. So when someone brings me a TSH of 3.8, which is smack in the middle of the TSH range where they were told it's normal, I think that is way too high, way too high. I think it explains everything they're telling me. When you're looking at free T3, the range at my age, again, for men and women around 45, is 2.3 to 4.2. I rarely see a free T3 level of 3.0 or above. Rarely. My medical term for that, low T3, but it's in range, but 2.5, 2.6, I call that in the toilet. How can you function like that? How can you get out of bed and think, hey, this day is great. I'm going to go kayaking. I'm going to go canoeing. I'm going to go to the gym. I mean, it's hard to function there.
Sure.
3T4, the range is 0.8 to 1.8. So say you get someone in that has 0.8, normal, right? In range. How are you supposed to convert T4 to T3 when you're hardly making T4? Yeah. How's that supposed to happen? So we want the upper range of free T3. the upper range of free T4, the lower range of TSH. Reverse T3, we want the lower end. We don't want to be making and converting a whole bunch of T3 into T4 into reverse T3, blocking up our real T3 receptors and not getting any benefit. So we want that to be, for me, I like it to be about 13 or 14 and under. But you don't know how many times I see 20 and 22, and the range goes up to 25. I still think that's a problem.
And just to interrupt really quick, that's actually more common in obese populations that you get this reverse T3 pooling, right?
Yeah. Yep.
I think that's a big one because nobody gets this reverse T3 test. You might see free T3 and T4, but you would never see reverse T3 unless they're at a functional doc.
Right, right. And it's hugely important because, so say you run a T3 and you have 3.2, which still isn't great to me, but it's better than the 2.5s I usually see. But if they have high reverse T3, they aren't getting any of that T3.
Right, because it's blockading you may have perfectly good active hormone, but if it's being blockaded by this inert version of T3, this reverse T3, it can't get into the cell. So you can have all you want. It's not going to help you because you've got this pool of anti-hormone hanging around, basically.
That's right. In the office, the analogy I use for reverse T3 is say you make $10,000 a day, like you're a millionaire, $10,000 a day, but it goes into this bank account, this money market or whatever you call it, and you can't utilize it. So then you have some repairs come up. You have $40,000 in the bank in just 1 week, but you can't access any of it. That's reverse T3. It's T3 that you can't even access. So it's worthless. Money in the bank that you can't use is worthless.
Okay. All right. Moving on to, I guess next one would be TPO antibodies.
Yeah. So the antibodies, depending on your lab, the lab we use a lot is Quest, and they want less than 9 is normal. So again, even if you have 12 or 22, I just think that's, we don't want any antibodies circulating in our bloodstream. And then the thyroglobulin, I don't always run that, but it is good to know. And depending on the lab, some people want it less than 10. There's another lab that we use sometimes that wants it less than 115. But again, I think it's like being pregnant. You don't want any antibodies.
Now, what specifically is that one testing for? Is that different than the Hashis, or is that like an adjunct?
It's an adjunct. It's more, it's just another type of antibodies, but it still would get you an autoimmune diagnosis.
Got it.
And then I also run selenium. And when you do selenium, things like selenium and magnesium, and I run a lot of zinc too, you have to get the RBC. So that's the red blood cell. You can't just do a straight serum because your cells or your body pulls from cell reserve. So it can look like you have a lot of selenium or zinc or mag circulating, but at the cellular level, you're deficient. So the red blood cell gives you a cellular level, and it's a more accurate level. So I do run selenium because selenium directly supports thyroid health. And then cortisol, we do a saliva test. It's the only time I do saliva tests for hormones. I don't believe in saliva tests for other hormones, but cortisol, it's a 4 test tube that different times of the day, and it can just tell you if you're really depressed or overly high in cortisol. And then iodine, you can do the 24-hour urine. And then iron is important because it directly affects thyroid function as well. So there's different iron levels that you can get too.
And just to throw out there, ferritin is not sufficient. You have to get all 4 of these iron labs to truly assess the state of iron, right? The ferritin, your serum iron, the percentage saturation, and the TIBC, right?
Yeah.
Okay. I think it's important to note because I see a lot of folks going, oh, my iron's fine. I got ferritin. It's okay. We're in range. Well, it's not that simple.
It's not.
Okay. All right. So that's kind of talking about the labs. And if you're on the board and you're saying, hey, I suspect that I'm having this problem. I've been listening to this podcast. This is describing me to a T. I need to write this down onto an index card and go in and talk to my doctor about ordering these labs, and specifically the TSH, the free T3, free T4, reverse T3, and then the TPO antibodies and the TGAB, the other antibodies.
Thyroglobulin, yes.
The thyroglobulin. So I'm going to go in with that written down on an index card and say, I listened to this on Dr. Google, and they told me that I needed these minimum tests in order to understand what my state of thyroid is, and I will not accept less than this full order of tests. And that's going to cost $10,000 of testing, right?
Right. Well, you know, we have some good self-pay prices worked out with the labs, but the other issue, there's two issues. Number one is if you're in a regular practice, providers do not know how to code, so they don't know what diagnosis fits with being able to do these levels. So when you're in it, we are a cash-based only office, and you have to be that way for functional medicine because our consults are an hour and a half, sometimes 2 hours long. There's no way to code for that. It's just out of the question.
Right.
Number two, you're taught in any school you go to, whether you're a doctor or a nurse practitioner, do not order a test that you don't know how to interpret and you don't know what to do with. So if a provider has no idea what to do with a reverse T3, they probably are not going to order it. Now, on the flip side of that, if you go in saying, you know, I just want my free T3, these symptoms that I'm having sound to me like low T3 syndrome, and that's what I really want, you would be hard pressed as a provider to be like, no, because I mean, you just would. So there's a lot of different ways that it can go. It just depends on your provider.
So I also want to throw out, I was kind of making a joke there. A typical complaint that I would hear is, oh, this is going to be very expensive to get all these tests. The average test to get this 6 thing is under $120.
Oh, good.
It's not expensive when you go. I could even go out on the internet and like go to one of these labsonline.com kind of places, and for $120, I get an appointment to go down to my favorite blood drawing place, and then they just ship it off, or even to Quest, and for well under $150, you can get this full thing. And a lot of places have these little packages where, you know, they have like a whole little bundle for $70. You get the thyroid lab, and then for another $20, you can get the antibodies or whatever. So cost should not be a factor. And I think where cost becomes a factor is if a doctor doesn't know how to code for it, and then you have to pay cash for it.
Right. And it's a little bit of a, I think, a fear mongering too with the providers, like, because they don't want to run them. So they're going to tell you these are going to be really expensive, and everyone knows money talks. So you're going to be like, all right, it's fine. I don't want to have to spend the money.
I can't tell you the number of people who I've said, well, where's your reverse T3? They go, I don't know, and I couldn't afford to find out. It's $11. What are you talking about?
Right. And now we have these, like you're saying, any lab tests now where you can be in control. We all should be in control of our health, and we all should have a say. And I always tell my patients, you just paid me, so now I work for you. I can tell you what's in the literature. I can tell you what's in the studies, and I can tell you personal experience with my patients and myself, but you are ultimately the captain of your ship. You make the decisions.
Yeah, I think that's such in some ways, Dr. Google is very annoying because people come in and they think they understand. But in matters of complexity and seeking optimal, I think listening to experts like yourself who have spent the time to go through practice and learn how to deliver functional medicine, there are some ranges. I mean, you've been very generous with explaining exactly what you would look for and what you would do about it. And getting an honest to goodness diagnosis about what's going on is such a key component to pursuing that health. And I think you have to own that a little bit, unless you're willing to trade a lot of money to hire someone like you to do it on their behalf. But someone like me who doesn't have a provider who's versed in this stuff, if I do enough homework on the internet and listen to some podcasts and take some good notes, I can walk in there to my general provider with an index card and go, hey, I need these tests run, and I'm looking for these ranges because I don't feel right. I think I have this going on, and I'd like to rule it out using these tests.
Right. You know, and the other thing along the line, Ben, is I one patient in particular, she's been seeing me for about 1.5 years. She has Hashimoto's. Her antibodies at Quest, anyway, they stopped counting them at 900, and that's the lab we usually use. So she came to me after seeing 8 doctors. Half of them were endocrinologists. So if you think of, and so and no one ever ran her antibodies. If you think about it, when you go see a specialist like endocrinology, you sometimes have a copay of $50.
Oh,
So
yeah.
by the time, and each time you go to a doctor, you spend like maybe 6 months, 8 months trying to figure out, okay, that we're not getting anywhere. So then you go to somewhere new, you've wasted 5 years of your life.
Oh,
Who
yeah.
knows how much money, where you could have just went and invested in yourself with a functional provider and gotten to the bottom of things. So that's another thing to look at too. But don't be afraid to fire your provider. There's plenty of
Absolutely.
us around.
I 100% agree with that. And if you don't have the technical savvy or the medical background to understand some of the things that we're talking about, this is where you can find the right kind of expertise by looking for it. All right, let's hit nutrition real quick. And then I want you to talk about that process a little bit more, because I think one of the biggest things that people don't understand is how to find the right kind of doc. So we've kind of talked about most of these, but on the nutrition front, we talked about selenium, and one of the most common ways to get a hold of selenium is something that I do in my family is Brazil nuts. I go to Whole Foods, I go to the bulk bin, and I get a pound of Brazil nuts, and that's like 150 nuts for $12. And then each one of us eats one Brazil nut a day. That's about 125% of the selenium you would need in a given thing. So 1 or 2 Brazil nuts a day gives you all the selenium you need. And then you don't have to worry about a nutritional source for what is kind of that's really the only thing in nature that has a bunch of selenium, right?
Right.
The next thing we talked about was the B vitamins kind of support the creation of this hormone. Specifically, I want to call out the methylated form of B12 and how important it is for that to be the sublingual version of this. B12 does not survive your gut. If you just take it and swallow it, nothing happens. It will not make it into your body. You have to hold it under your tongue in like these little, it's almost like a little dinner mint, and it melts under your tongue and gets absorbed through all the little veins and mucous membranes under your tongue. Now, for those of you that have a Costco membership, you can get a year's supply of sublingual B12 for under $15. It's incredibly cheap. You don't have to we're not talking about expensive stuff. You just kind of have to hunt out the right stuff. And if you can't get to a Costco, you can just order it off Amazon for $20 instead of the 15 you could get if you go in the store. We didn't really talk about the vitamin A, vitamin D, vitamin K complex, but that's a key input, right?
Right.
Well, one of the things that we've learned from Dr. Chris Masterjohn, who I'm a big disciple of, I love everything he's got to say. He's a vitamin K expert, one of the world's leaders in that. And this is that MK4 D3 drop that we get from Thorne Research. It's like $30 for a 6-month supply. It's a little bottle that you order from Amazon. There'll be a link in the show notes for that if you're interested in that kind of thing. And it's just these little drops. There's also MK7 pills that you can get from Now, and Jarrow's makes them. A bunch of other places get them. But vitamin K and vitamin D are an important part of the thyroid metabolism when it comes to creating that T4 in the body. So you need to have these things there. B complex, vitamin C, vitamin E, all those are the same thing. You just want them there. You want to have plenty of them. It's metabolic substrate for all the enzymatic reactions that occur inside the gland. Now, I don't want to get too much into this rat hole. Just tell me about this. There are a lot of people who have read the books about, Stop Thyroid Madness, that talk about iodine supplementation. As a medical professional, do you think that it is a good idea that people be self-dosing without labs 12.5 micrograms of iodine every day?
Yeah, I don't. I think iodine is a little bit, because if you have Hashimoto's and you don't know about it, iodine can be detrimental to that. So you just have to be really careful. And I do think that one should be watched closely.
Yeah. And I think you just said the key point, which is there are a lot of people who will actually make their symptoms worse by taking iodine without the proper diagnosis.
Right.
So don't mess around with that. Make sure you know what you're doing. Make sure you have the tests. And a 24-hour urine iodine test, again, is not expensive. It's just annoying because you have to pee into a jug for a day.
Right.
But it's something that a normal provider can work with. You don't need a fancy doctor for that. You just have to go down that road to get that correct diagnosis about your iodine uptake. I
Right.
see that. I see so many people ordering that Idolarol or whatever it is, and then they're doing mega doses of it because that's what everybody says to do on the internet. That's spooky, and I would not recommend it. And I don't. It's spooky. Okay.
Totally.
So, Teresa, we're about out of time. Here's my last question to you. I think that a number of people have the financial means to find a supportive doctor to help them work through their thyroid issue. You did mention it's interesting when you talk about going through 5 different providers trying to find the right kind of doc rather than just ponying up and paying cash for a functional provider. But at the end of the day, if I have the financial means to do so, which most people do when it comes to something like getting the right kind of diagnosis for a lifelong illness, it's worth spending the money to get it done. How do I find a supportive doc who actually understands that I'm seeking optimal and not just baseline?
Right. So those links that you put up, I'm specifically with WorldLink Medical. So they have bioidentical hormone providers, and then Institute of Functional Medicine. But if you are having trouble and you don't want to go that route, you could even call the local pharmacies and ask who prescribes the natural thyroid, which is natural desiccated thyroid, like Armor, Nature Throid, or West Throid. Those are actually Armor and Nature Throid are the most popular. Mm-hmm. And then you could ask compounding pharmacists. You can call up local compounding pharmacies, and then even Walmart, and just say, who prescribes Armor there? I'm looking for a doctor that believes in that. And they can help send you on your way there. I just think you don't be afraid to fire your doctor, even if they're nice and you think they're nice. I mean, it goes much more than that, because you are the customer. And I get so irritated day after day when I hear the stories from patients and what they've been told by their providers. It's unconscionable to me. And I don't even know the word I'm looking for. I just think it's a shame. And so you guys are our customers. And so we work for you. So don't be afraid to fire them. Just go around and look at some of the pharmacies, like I said, and just try to find someone. You can always call the office and say, do they believe in Armor or Nature Throid or doing the full lab workup? You could even find out a lot just from the receptionist, because why are you going to waste your time? But don't be afraid, because you are in charge. You're paying the bill. So we're the employee and you're the employer.
Great. I think that's a perfect, easy litmus test of making sure that you're in the right building, at least.
Yeah.
Everybody's going to have their own little areas of expertise, but certainly when we're talking about holistic health and these various things, if they're not using NDT and they're not willing to run full thyroid panels, that's not the person you're looking for. That's a different kind of doctor.
Right. Because if they aren't using the NDTs, the natural desiccated thyroid, you're going to get a T4 only medicine. And then you run into what we talked about at the very beginning of the show. You're hoping and praying for conversion from T4 to T3. Natural desiccated thyroid gives your body a little bit of T3 and a lot of T4. So that it's a combo pill. So you're automatically getting T3. You're not waiting for your conversion of T4 to T3.
Perfect. Okay. Teresa, I am going to put a cork in it for today. Thank you so much for taking some time and walking us through this. This is a very complex topic, and this was just the surface of it. And an hour later, we're just getting to the very basics of how do you test it?
Yes.
All conversations and information exchanged during participation in this podcast are intended for informational and entertainment purposes only. This information should not be considered treatment or medical advice. You must always follow your medical professional's advice and direction. Although Teresa is a licensed, board-certified family nurse practitioner with specialty certification in bioidentical hormones from WorldLink Medical, she is not functioning as a medical practitioner in this environment. Also, Ben is not qualified to open a pickle jar without supervision. I wouldn't trust that guy, and neither should you.